It killed more people than World War I, yet no one talks about it. It moved with no footsteps. It fired no bullets. It carried no flag. Yet it crossed every border, reached every continent, and killed indiscriminately. The year was 1918. As the Great War was drawing to a close, a far greater killer was just beginning to rise. By the time it passed, an estimated 50 to 100 million people, 3 to 5% of Earth's population, had perished. No virus in recorded history had ever spread with such violence, nor vanished with such silence. It was called the Spanish flu, but it began far from Spain. It rewrote the course of medicine, public health, and society itself. And yet, somehow, we forgot. To understand this pandemic is to understand the forgotten century, where invisible enemies shaped the world as profoundly as any war or revolution. It did not begin in Spain. Most likely, it began in Haskell County, Kansas. In March 1918, a young soldier named Albert Gitchell at Camp Funston reported to the infirmary with a high fever and sore throat. By lunchtime, more than 100 soldiers followed him. Doctors assumed it was a seasonal flu. After all, nothing seemed extraordinary, until it spread through military barracks, then across the Atlantic with American troops. In a matter of weeks, it would reach France, Britain, Italy, and Germany, silent, invisible, and devastating. It began not with thunder, but with a cough. The world in 1918 was a world already in ruin. The First World War had ravaged Europe, leaving trenches soaked in blood and mud, and the air thick with the stench of rot and gas. Millions had died. Millions more were displaced. Food was scarce, cities crumbling, and hope worn thin. It was in this wounded world that the virus emerged, born in the crucible of global war, nurtured in the crowded camps and hospitals of young men sent to die. Camp Funston, Kansas, March 1918. Albert Gitchell, a mess cook at Camp Funston, may have been the first recorded case. But in truth, the virus had likely been circulating in the rural farms of Kansas before that. Haskell County had seen a strange wave of illness weeks earlier. So intense, local doctors sent warnings to public health officials in Washington. But the war demanded silence. Troop morale could not be disturbed by invisible threats. Within days of Gitchell's diagnosis, over 500 soldiers at Camp Funston had fallen ill. The camp was one of the largest military training facilities in the United States. Within weeks, tens of thousands of American troops were sailing across the Atlantic. They did not know it, but they carried more than guns. The virus hitched a ride, inside lungs, on clothing, in the breath of young men. It arrived in France by April, then Britain, then Italy, then the world. Why Spanish flu? It did not start here. Not in the cobbled streets of Madrid, nor in the royal halls of the Spanish crown. Spain, neutral in the bloodshed of World War I, stood apart from the trenches, the telegrams, the military censors. And so, when the illness came, it was not hidden, not softened, nor silenced. Spanish newspapers reported it all, openly, urgently, unfiltered. A mysterious fever, a spreading shadow. Even King Alfonso XIII was not spared. Across the continent, things were different. In Britain, in France, in Germany, governments waged a war not only of soldiers, but of silence. News of the sickness was buried, blacked out, censored in the name of morale. And so, the world looked to the one country that spoke the truth, and made it the scapegoat. They called it the Spanish flu, but the name was never about geography. It was about visibility. A misnamed plague, a political sleight of hand, a mask over the true face of a global catastrophe. This flu did not behave like those before it. It did not just kill the old or weak. It struck down the young and strong, those between 20 and 40, by the millions. It triggered a cytokine storm, an overreaction of the immune system, drowning lungs in fluid. In some cases, patients turned blue within hours. Their skin darkened. They bled from the nose, ears, and eyes. Then, they died, sometimes the same day. The war had taken years to destroy 16 million lives. This flu would take more than 50 million in just 15 months. And this was only the beginning. It came in waves. The first was deadly, yes, but what followed was cataclysmic. It did not scream. It did not burn. It whispered its way into the world. In the spring of 1918, the virus began its quiet ascent. It spread not with panic, but with indifference. It moved with the soldiers, from the heartland of Kansas, through bustling port cities, across the Atlantic, and into the trenches of Europe. The first wave seemed mild, strange, yes, but not apocalyptic. Most infected recovered in a few days. Fever, sore throat, headaches, nothing worse than a seasonal flu. Doctors noted its rapid spread, but dismissed its danger. The world was too busy dying in the war to notice another illness. Military life was the perfect incubator. Tens of thousands of men in tight quarters, poor ventilation, shared meals, shared air, and little understanding of virology. At Camp Devens, Massachusetts, and Etaples in France, entire units fell ill within days. Doctors had no explanation. Antibiotics didn't exist. The best they had was bed rest and prayers. But this flu was deceptive. It wore the mask of the ordinary. Fever, cough, fatigue. It lulled its hosts into complacency. Some patients recovered, others collapsed overnight. It showed no consistency, only speed. The war carried the virus across the world. British, French, German, American, Australian, Indian troops all moved on ships and trains, and so did the flu. By May 1918, outbreaks had reached North Africa, China, India, and the Philippines. Still, no one truly panicked. Deaths were few, the symptoms manageable. It would pass, they thought. Summer brought hope. Infection rates fell, hospitals cleared, governments and generals declared it over. But the virus had only paused, changing, mutating, preparing. In the fall, it would return, transformed. The second wave was not gentle. It was not forgiving. It would be one of the deadliest events in human history. In the fall of 1918, the virus returned, not as a whisper, but a scream. Somewhere, in a crowded trench or a troop ship's dark belly, influenza had changed. A mutation, subtle but devastating. It now killed not in days, but in hours. It began in late August, first in Brest, France, then Freetown, Sierra Leone, then Boston. This time, it moved with a new ferocity. Strong young men, soldiers in their prime, fell like autumn leaves. Doctors called it the Purple Death. Victims turned deep blue from lack of oxygen, cyanosis, as their lungs filled with fluid. Autopsies revealed lungs so swollen and sodden they resembled liver more than organ. Some doctors cut open chests only to find pink foam gushing out. Dr. Victor Vaughn, U.S. Army Medical Corps. Bodies stacked like cordwood. No time for coffins, no time for names. Entire families perished in days. Cities became funeral pyres, and still, the virus spread. In India, it was worse. Some 18 million died, many without medicine, without burial, without witness. In Iran, corpses lay in the streets, scavenged by dogs. In the US, bodies were buried in mass graves. Churches turned into infirmaries. Schools became morgues. Unlike most flus, which prey on the old and the weak, this one targeted the strong. The healthy immune systems of adults overreacted, a cytokine storm, flooding the lungs, destroying the body from within. There were no antivirals, no antibiotics for secondary infections. Ventilators didn't exist. Vaccines were decades away. Doctors were helpless. Priests were exhausted. Gravediggers overwhelmed. By November, the virus had begun to ebb, but not before it killed more people than the entire Great War. The world was too dazed to comprehend it. There were no victory parades for this battle, only silence. The war ended. The guns fell silent. But the virus still lingered, like smoke after a fire. The dead numbered in the tens of millions, and the world simply moved on. What happens when a planet falls sick? Not just a city, not a nation, but an entire world, infected, overwhelmed, and silent. In the United States, entire cities shut down. Philadelphia, ignoring medical advice, held a massive parade in late September 1918. Just 3 days later, the death toll spiked. Hospitals overflowed. Bodies lined the streets. In contrast, St. Louis acted early, canceling events, closing schools, enforcing mask mandates. The result? Fewer deaths. The beginning of modern public health policy, born from desperation. Mask laws appeared overnight. Gauze masks, thin, often useless, became mandatory. In San Francisco, the Anti-Mask League rebelled, calling it tyranny. But the virus didn't care. Quarantine signs marked infected homes. Travel was restricted. Trains stopped. Ships quarantined at sea. And still, the virus spread. No place suffered more than India. Carried by returning soldiers and ships from the West, the virus struck a nation already weakened by famine and colonial neglect. In just a few months, over 18 million Indians died, more than 1 in every 20 people. In some regions, entire villages disappeared. British officials downplayed the crisis. Relief was slow, inadequate, often indifferent. It killed between 50 and 100 million people, more than the Black Death, more than any war before it. And yet, we forgot. The Spanish flu left no monuments, no parades, no annual days of mourning. Unlike wars, there were no heroes to celebrate, only absence, empty chairs, forgotten names. After the war, the world craved joy, not grief. Cities erupted into jazz, speakeasies, liberation. The Roaring Twenties drowned memory in music and movement. Psychologists call it collective trauma, a horror so vast it becomes ungraspable. People didn't want to remember, so they didn't. Stories weren't passed down. Children never asked. Families closed the door on death. Textbooks, for decades, gave the flu a single paragraph, if that. Why? Because it lacked narrative. It had no clear villains, no battlegrounds. It was chaos, suffering, silence. Even scholars overlooked it. Until recently, few had written books about it. Few had researched its toll on art, policy, society. But then, a century later, a new virus arrived. This time, we couldn't look away. The world was wired. Every death live-streamed, every debate recorded, every fear algorithmically amplified. COVID-19, unlike the Spanish flu, became a global mirror. It exposed inequality, reshaped economies, entered politics, classrooms, families. Yet even now, we ask, how long will we remember? Memory is a defense against repetition. When we forget, we invite recurrence. The Spanish flu was a warning whispered through time. We failed to listen. But now, perhaps we finally will. It arrived unnoticed and left uncelebrated. But the Spanish flu was a war, one fought in silence, with breath as both weapon and weakness. In 1918, the proud machinery of civilization, its cities, its science, its systems, was brought to its knees by something unseen. We were reminded that progress is fragile, that comfort is conditional, and that the line between order and collapse is thinner than we imagine. Yet, when the dying stopped, so too did the remembering. The silence that followed became a second tragedy, a forgetting that stripped the dead of legacy and left the living vulnerable once more. We forgot 1918, and in that forgetting, we repeated it. But history, though cruel, offers redemption in remembrance. COVID-19 shattered our illusion of invulnerability and forced us to confront echoes long buried. The masks, the fear, the chaos, they were not new, only rehearsed. And yet, from both pandemics came light. The birth of modern medicine, the strengthening of public health, and the humbling of human arrogance. The Spanish flu left no monuments, but its warning is carved into every protocol, every vaccine, every lesson passed forward. We remember not out of grief, but out of duty. And so we remember, not to mourn, but to prepare, not to dwell in death, but to honor life. Because the war was invisible, but its lessons must not be.